the foundations of the Avos. In these weeks after the Yom Neroim, after Sukkot, the month of Cheshvan, leading up to Hanukkah, it's one of those tkufas, the rare periods of time that we have on the Jewish calendar where there are really no Moedim, there are no Chagim, there are no Tanesim. It's a period of time where it's a time that we immerse ourselves in our activities, in our learning, in our endeavors. It's a time of the new cycle of the Kriyas HaTorah, an appropriate time to explore the foundations of the Avos of our forefathers, the foundations of our Avos, and the foundations that the Torah and Klal Yisrael were built on, leading up to the period of time where we explore Hanukkah. Parshas Lecha, we begin with the journeys of Avram Avinu and the details of Avram Avinu's life. The first, of course, of the Avos. And we know that Avram Avinu, his life is marked by the Nisyanos, the Asar Nisyanos of Avram Avinu. The great challenges and tests that he had in his life and how he overcame them. And that was the foundation of Klal Yisrael. When we examine these Nisyanos, it's quite puzzling. There are many things and events in Avram Avinu's life that one would have thought were a Nisyan. He didn't have children till a very, very advanced age. And one would think that not having children for the greater part of one's life, for so many years, all those many, many years that he and Sarah Imenu could not have children, would have been a Nisayan. He had the Nisayan of having a son like Ishmael. Now, the son, the Ishmael that he had, and the challenges of having such a son, that's not considered one of the Nisyanos. One of the Nisyanos were sending him away. But the fact that he had a son that was a para Adam, that's not considered a Nisayan. One would have thought that after overcoming the great challenge, the great Nisayan of the Akedah, he returns home and Sarah Imenu suddenly dies, would be a great tragedy. Would be a terrible tragedy that, look, after he followed the word of Hashem and he went through the Akedah, and the news of the Akedah caused, according to the Medrash, Sarah Imenu to die suddenly, that would be considered a tragedy, a terrible tragedy, and a Nisayan, but it's not considered one of the Nisyanos. And yet, on the other hand, Lecha is considered a Nisayan. It's so puzzling. Lecha. Yes, he was asked to leave his home and to leave his father, but he was asked to leave with the promise of the greatest blessings, of the land of Eretz Yisrael, of children, of wealth, of fame. So yes, he was asked to leave his land, but why would that be considered a sign, especially compared to some of the other challenges that he had, where many people, if they were promised, leave your country, leave your homeland, and go and you'll have fame and fortune and children, and you will be, throughout the land and throughout history, you will be a successful, famous, fortunate person. And that's considered a Nisayan. We know that the Nisayan of the Bris Milah was a Nisayan. Well, yes, it was, but what was the great challenge? He had already overcome the challenge of the Kivshan Ha'esh. He was willing, prepared, to be thrown into a fiery furnace, to be burnt alive, to be consumed in the Kivshan Ha'esh, to be faithful to the Rebbeinu Shalom. After that Nisayan, why was the Milah, the Nisayan, why was that considered a Nisayan? So how are we to understand the Asar Nisyanos of Avram Avinu? The first point is to define what is a Nisayan. Now, we commonly think of a nisayon as being a challenge, something that's difficult. A challenge, something that's difficult to overcome. That's how we typically define nisyonos. But in the context of the Asar Nisyonos of Avraham Avinu, there's a different explanation. The Ramban says that the nisyonos are given to tzaddikim in order to have them, enable them to draw out min hakoyach el hapoyel, to draw out from what's in them, the talents, the hidden strengths that are deep inside of them, to draw that out and bring it out to the open and have them have it not only as a potential, but have it realized in action as well. An nisayon, according to Rashi is bavor lanasois eschem, to make you great. A nisayon is something that brings out our hidden talents and makes us great. And in the context of Avraham Avinu, a nisayon was not only difficulties that he encountered in life, not only challenges that he encountered in life. The nisyonos of Avraham Avinu were those tests, those challenges that forced him, to challenge him to go counter to his nature, to fight against his natural inclinations, to go what was opposite of what his natural tendencies would be, to overcome them and become a greater person, a different person, a greater person. That's a nisayon in the context of Avraham Avinu. It's not just a difficulty. Yes, he had difficulties, and he had pain and suffering, not having children all those years. Yes, he had to raise a son like Ishmael, and his beloved wife, Eshes Chayil Sori Imenu, died suddenly. Those are difficulties. But those are difficulties and pain and difficulties that didn't run counter to his tendencies, to his teva, to his nature. His nature was to be a mamin. His nature was to have trust in Hashem and to endure. But it was counter to his nature to abandon his father. He was ish chesed. To abandon his father, to abandon his people, his homeland, to tear himself completely away from his band. Lech, Lecha, that was a challenge. It may not have been a challenge, a nisayon for other people with the promise of fame and fortune, but for Avraham Avinu to abandon his people, to abandon his homeland, to cut himself off completely, not have any connection, any further connection, both physically, emotionally, mentally, with his background and his father. That's a challenge. Yes, after the Kivshana Eish, it was not a challenge to endure the pain of the Bris Milah, but there was a different nisayon. There was a different nisayon because the understanding, the anticipation of going through such an action where he would be ostracized from civilization, ostracized from society, to do something that society would consider to be barbaric and grotesque and not have anything to do with such a person. The Isha Chesed, Avraham Avinu, the Machnes Eirech, the Makarav Rechaikim, to have himself as an outcast, to be ostracized, to be considered barbaric and grotesque, that was an nisayon. And in fact, we do find that after the Bris Milah, he was waiting by his tent, waiting for orchim, waiting for guests. A deeper understanding of it is not only to become the mitzvahs of achnosas orchim, surely that was so, but also because he anticipated that there would not be orchim, that there would never be orchim, because he's an outcast. That's a nisayon for someone like Avraham Avinu. It's a nisayon for Avraham Avinu, who his whole life was ish chesed, fought against Avodah Zarah, fought against the barbaric acts of Avodah Zarah that was prevalent at the time, burning people, killing people, doing all kinds of barbaric acts for Avodah Zarah than for him himself, who preached that his whole life, to take his son, his only son, his Ben Yochid, beloved son, and to sacrifice him on the altar, when his whole life he was preaching and fighting against Avodah Zarah that performed similar types of acts, for him to take his beloved Ben Yochid and burn him on the altar. That's a supreme act of devotion to Hashem, of a nisoyan, of countering his very nature, his whole essence, his whole being, going against his whole being to become Dvar Hashem. That's the nisoyan of Avram Avinu. The nisoyan of Avram Avinu is not only to maximize his potential with what flows with his nature, what comes naturally to him, chesed, kindness, intellectual reasoning. He came to the Akara of the Ribbono Shel Olam through his intellect. But here he's asked to do things that are counter to his intellect, that are completely counter to rational, to reason. His whole life was an avodah. He came to the Ribbono Shel Olam by reasoning that this could not have happened on its own. He came through his intellect. His avodah was through chesed, through kindness. He's being asked to do things that are totally counter to his intellect and avodah Hashem. That is an nisoyan, and that elevates him, and he became the Av Hamoin Goyim. And that's the meaning of a nisoyan, for tzaddikim, for a nisoyan. Sometimes people have to encounter difficult things, or Chemana Litzlan, encounter difficult things in their lives. And they have to endure. And that's part of Avodas Hashem. Sometimes we're asked and called upon not only to do difficult things, but to do things that run counter to our very nature and turn ourselves into different people when called upon in Avodas Hashem. And that's an nisoyan. And Avram Avinu passed those nisyonos, and he became the great Avram Avinu. He became the Av Hamoin Goyim. And sometimes in our lives, we have to, Rahman al-Islam, endure all kinds of things. But when called upon, sometimes we also have to become different people. Just to conclude with a Maisa that was told over to me by Rav Simcha Wasserman Zatzal, involving Rav Aaron Kotler Zatzal. And that during the war years, those few who were in America at the time and heard about the tragedies and the atrocities of the Holocaust, so they tried valiantly to galvanize the tzibur that was here, to raise money, to put in all the kinds of efforts to try to save whoever they could save. Rav Aaron had a Yedid from Kladsk. He had a Yedid who was a big Talmud Chacham, who happened to be a Rav and a Kehillah in America. So he called upon him to help him in the efforts to go and to speak to people and motivate them to donate money, to get involved, to try to save whoever could be saved. This Rav had a small Kehillah, and he was involved primarily in learning during the day. He was a big Talmud Chacham. So he told Rav Aaron, he said that he's learning a whole day. He's involved in learning. There are many people in America that are not learning a whole day. He says that he is not a speaker. He doesn't have those kind of talents. There are other people who do have those kind of talents. So he told Rav Aaron, so you should approach those people. I'm learning a whole day. Gadol Talmud Torah, Yoser Me'atzolos Nefashos. I'm involved in Talmud Torah. It's greater than Atzolos Nefashos. I don't have the capabilities to do those things. I don't have the time. I don't have the capabilities. I don't have the talents. There are other people who do. You should approach them and not me. And Rav Aaron answered him and he said, you're right. Gadol Talmud Torah, Yoser Me'atzolos Nefashos. So if you are given a choice, between Talmud Torah and Atzolos Nefashos, choose Talmud Torah. However, you are not being given a choice. You don't have the choice. Right now, at this critical moment, you are being called upon to save those lives. This is your calling right now. So this is what you have to do right now. You're not been given the choice. So sometimes, when we don't have the talents, and when we feel they don't have the talents, when we feel we don't have the time, we don't have the energy, and we feel that other people should do it, could do it better. But if we're called upon, perhaps there are those latent koiches deep inside that are now being summoned to come forward in the service of the Rebbeinu Shalom. When we think we don't have those talents, when we think we don't have those strengths, when it's not our nature, when it does not come naturally to us and easily to us, it seems counter to our very being, we're being called upon. That's in Soyan. And it's up to us to rise